Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Jamf and Time Out. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vidici. Hi, Federico.
Hi, John. How are you?
Doing really well, thanks. You know, Federico, to maximize time, I'm going to just dive right in because we have a special guest. Today, we're speaking with Christian Selig, the developer of Apollo, a Reddit client for iOS. It's an app that we've reviewed here on Mac Stories and like a lot from the design standpoint as well as its functionality. We're going to get into both of those aspects of Apollo in a little bit. But first, I'd just like to welcome you to the show, Christian. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to talk to you. I mean, Apollo, it was in development for a very long time.
Yes.
And I know from reading on your website, and I wanted to just ask, I guess, so why a Reddit client, and what was missing from the existing apps out there that you felt there was a gap and a need that needed to be filled?
Yeah, that's obviously a great place to start. For me, it was, probably back around 3 years ago, I was using Alien Blue, was big at the time before Reddit acquired it and everything went down. And I liked it a lot and it was powerful, obviously, but I find when I'm using an iOS app, I'm very particular about it feeling, at home on iOS and feeling native. And while I loved Alien Blue, I felt it was drifting a little too far away from that. And it was kind of entering this almost Android-esque design paradigm kind of thing. And there was a lot of things that I just felt it could do better. And obviously when you use something every day for a lot of time, like a lot of people do Reddit, if you can scratch that itch yourself and fix some of those things, it's something I really wanted to do, and I was hoping that other people would find a similar benefit in it.
Yeah, I can tell from just using the app that you're an avid Reddit user, because there's just the kind of touches and little details that you would expect from somebody who deals with the frustrations of navigating through Reddit, because there's a lot of features, right? To me, it seems like Reddit is one of those, doing a Reddit client is one of those type of apps that would be really hard to develop just because there are so many different aspects of the service that have to be incorporated. What were some of the challenges that you faced when you were building the app?
Yeah, I wish I would have talked to you before I started. I think I underestimated the whole thing. I was like, this can't be that bad, can it? But yeah, it was. You were definitely right. I would say far and away, design is obviously the hardest part. There'd be programming's obviously difficult, and I honestly think what a lot of people assume is the biggest part of it. But for me at least, I would agonize over like really small details for hours sometimes, and just eventually just have to ship them out and say like, look, what do you guys think? The users, did I completely blow it here, and most of the time, thankfully, I was just overanalyzing it a little and I was on the right track. But yeah, I would say far and away, just designing so many facets Reddit has. It's like you said, it's such a feature-rich service that designing so many of the little different aspects that all have to come together it was like a puzzle.
Yeah, it strikes me too that it's one of those things where it might be hard to design both for the expert Reddit user, somebody who's been using the service for years, versus someone who maybe is new or relatively new to the service. Did you have kind of a target user in mind between those two?
In terms of that, I think I kind of wanted to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to be able to hopefully manage both, in that I wanted it to be really approachable for most users. So I was hoping that in a sense it was almost like if Apple built a Reddit app, you'd be able to pick it up and use it very quickly without having to consult a manual. I really didn't even want to have one of those walkthroughs at the beginning of an app if I could avoid that altogether. So I was very much aiming for a basic user to be able to use it without any difficulty. But at the same time, as I'm sure you know, a lot of Redditors are very technical and they expect a lot out of these apps, especially when I was designing it, it was coming up against Alien Blue, which was like incredibly feature rich. So at the same time, if I just shipped it out and it was this really nice, simple experience, I don't think it would have caught anyone's eye, because there are such high expectations as to what a Reddit app can do. So yeah, I think I had to balance both, and it was tricky, and hopefully I managed it okay, but I tried to make it so all the obvious stuff was there in the forefront. But if you wanted to do something that was a little more niche, it was tucked away somewhere that you could easily find it as well.
At what point did you approach the Reddit community and sort of started getting feedback from other Reddit users? I assume sending out the betas of the initial versions of the app. How did you approach talking to the Reddit community and saying, hey, I'm working on this Reddit client. Here's what I have in mind. What are your ideas and requests for where I should be going?
It was pretty informal. I think it was around, I want to say February 2015, so a while back. I thought I was at like the 90% point at the app, so I was like, okay, guys, I'm working on this Reddit app. I'd love to have your final little bit of feedback before I launch it, just to make sure I have all my ducks in a row. And this was right around when Alien Blue was starting to be less and less maintained, so there was a lot of demand for a new Reddit app that could potentially take its place. So there was a lot of interest. Thankfully, I just posted it in the Apple subreddit and said like, "Hey guys, I'm looking for some beta testers if anyone's interested." And yeah, oh my gosh, I think back then TestFlight only had like 1,000 users. It's up to like 10,000 now, but it filled up the Google Docs form before. Like I don't even think I had time to close it quick enough. It was ridiculous.
Huh.
So yeah, it was quite a while back. At the time, I thought it was going to be a few months off launch, but in the end, it ended up working out great because I had thousands of users over the last over 2 years giving me feedback throughout the process that really shaped the app for the better.
And how did you balance sort of sticking to your vision for what the app was going to be and also listening to beta testers? Did you, for example, was there ever some kind of disagreement whether the people were saying, I would like this feature to look like this, and you were like, no, because in my mind, this icon or this toolbar or something should be designed differently? How did you reconcile those feature requests with your own ideas for the app?
That's a really good question. I would say I've been pretty lucky in that I think the users I have understand kind of what Apollo's going for. So most of the suggestions I've had, I haven't had anything where an enormous amount of users have demanded something that's like completely against my vision for the app. I've been pretty lucky there. But at the same time, if that does come up, thankfully, the way Reddit works, it lends itself really well to building an app, because if I just got an email out of the blue that said, well, for instance, I didn't have dark mode in the 1.0 version. I know why people love it, but it's just not something. I'm more of a light mode user for whatever reason. And if somebody just shot an email off and said, hey, like, could you add dark mode? I'd be like, okay, yeah, that's a good request. I'll add that when I can. But as soon as the beta came out, it was like the top request by far. And there were people just, screaming at me to add it. So it's at that point that even if it wasn't something that I originally had envisioned, when you have like thousands of people screaming something at you, it's one of those things where I think it's kind of wise to listen,
right?
And maybe question, like, maybe I'm the crazy person here, not for wanting that. So I haven't had a lot of conflict there, but when that comes, I think I'll hopefully be wise enough to lend an ear.
Thanks to Jamf for sponsoring App Stories this week. Jamf Now helps you manage your Apple devices from anywhere. When you first start a business, it's easy to keep track of your own computer and your own phone. But as you grow and start to buy more and more tech for your employees, it gets harder and harder to track everyone's Macs, iPhones, and iPads. Figuring out how to secure that iPad that your sales rep lost while on a business trip can be tough, especially when you're in a different location than the sales rep. That's the problem that Jamf Now tackles. Jamf Now makes that and a whole lot more much easier. You can lock or wipe a device from anywhere. Jamf Now secures your stuff so you can focus on your business and not worry about the tech. There's no IT expertise needed. App Stories listeners can start securing their businesses today by setting up their first 3 devices for free. Add more for just $2 per month per device. Create your free account today at jamf.com/appstories. That's jamf.com/appstories. Use that URL so they know you came from the show. We'll put a link in the show notes too. Thanks again to Jamf for supporting the show.
What about the fact that, you've been working on this for 2-3 years, maybe even more?
Yeah.
And of course, in between, you were working on this app, but in between, Apple is doing WWDC and announcing new version of iOS, and you're still working on the app. And I assume every time there's like iOS 9, iOS 10, iOS 11, you go like, well, now I need to start over again. I don't know. Did you start over? How did the process go? Because I assume you went through a couple of major releases as you were working on Apollo.
No, totally. Thankfully, the only rewrite that I really had to do was voluntary. It was when Swift came out, and I was all juiced up on this new programming language, and I was like, I thankfully didn't have that much of the app done, so I was like, okay, I have to rewrite it then. But thankfully, the funny trivia, a few weeks before the app launched, I hadn't quite tidied up the new website yet, and it said something to the tune of like, great new iOS 8 features included. So, and this is when iOS 11 was weeks away. So yeah, and I had definitely dealt with a bit of that. But yeah, thankfully nothing was so massive, and in a lot of cases stuff like Safari View Controller really helped me, because you had this, I had written like a pretty expansive web browser, but Safari View Controller comes in and it's 2 lines of code and just, wiped the floor with what I had built. So in a lot of cases like that, it was just a dream to have that. And in other cases, stuff like when they added new notifications, it, like the new rich notifications API rather, it kind of just allowed me to go further with what I already had. So honestly, I'd say I thankfully built it in a way that it wasn't so hard to adapt to these changes. Nothing was like completely contingent on a specific iOS release. It was pretty flexible in what I was able to do.
So is the app completely built in Swift then?
Yeah. It was obviously fully Objective-C for the first little bit.
Sure.
But I was masochistic enough that at the beginning, I switched to Swift and just threw everything out.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. I mean, because early days of Swift, you would hear, at least we would hear from a lot of developers we deal with, that it was still such a young language that at times they were frustrated with the process of building apps in it. And a lot of people that I've met have said, well, yeah, I use Swift, but I only use it for this or that part of my app, smaller components. So that because they didn't want to write an entire app from the ground up in Swift because the language was so young. How was that experience?
I think they're totally right. It's one of those things where looking back, I'm happy with what I did, but I'm not 100% sure I would have. It was, funnily enough, when Swift was released, it was the summer I was at Apple, so I think I was drinking a little bit of the Kool-Aid there, and like not in a bad way, but everyone was running around campus so excited about this new language, so it was hard not to be excited as well. So. And the projects I worked on that summer at Apple were in Swift. So it was coming back to school that September, I was very much fully invested in Swift. So I was pretty much gung-ho from the beginning. But yeah, there was definitely some rough edges at times. And even today, I don't think it's necessarily as fast as Objective-C in most cases. Like it was, I built all of Apollo on a 2013 MacBook Pro, like one of the 13 inches. So it wasn't anything overly powerful. And there were at times, where it was pretty rough on the computer, but overall, thankfully, honestly, like at the stage it's in now, I'm really happy with Swift. I enjoy writing in it a lot more than Objective-C. So for me, I'd honestly recommend it to anyone. But yeah, back in the earlier days, it definitely wasn't as clear a path as it is now.
So it feels, I mean, now that you're just in the process of revising and updating the app, is Swift now just a little easier for it to use?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a few libraries I use where they're written in Objective-C. Like I use Pinterest and Facebook built a nice UI library called Texture, and sometimes I'll go in and maybe do like a pull request or tweak some code in there, and it's a little jarring going back to Objective-C and trying to.
Yeah, I bet.
It feels a little like you're in a museum in a way, but I hopefully won't offend anyone by saying that. But it's different.
Yeah, no, it is very different. You mentioned that you worked at Apple for a summer while you were in school. Was that you did an internship there, right?
Yeah.
I know you can't really talk about what you worked on, but what was the experience like being an intern at Apple?
It was really awesome. It's one of those things where, I think there's an inherent benefit to just surrounding yourself with really, really smart people, and obviously that's the case. You walk around there, and it's just full of really accomplished, really smart people who are just like the best out there at their job, and just surrounding yourself in that for 4 months is just, from a personal development level, is just incredibly helpful. But the company itself the people I worked with were so great as well, and it was just cool seeing a lot of the like Tim Cook and all those walking around casually once in a while. I remember my boss was lucky enough that he let us basically once in a while, like we didn't have to go to the office to work. We could just work from home or work around the main campus. And I remember one day I went to the design building at Infinite Loop and just kind of sat in the lobby and waited for Johnny Ive to pass by a few times, and I was like freaking out a little bit. But yeah, it's a great experience just to be really at the place where the sausage is made, so to speak. So I really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks to Time Out by DJill for sponsoring App Stories this week. Everybody needs a break once in a while. But when you're in the zone and working hard on something you care about, it can be hard to remember to get up, stretch, and rest your eyes. That's where Time Out comes in. It's a Mac app that reminds you to take regular breaks. Whether your hands need a rest to avoid RSI or your eyes just need a break, it's not healthy to sit for hours on end. With Time Out, you set regular breaks. When the break is due, the screen slowly fades and a progress bar appears that counts down your break. You can include optional buttons to postpone or skip breaks. And there's a feature that I really love, which is if you find yourself postponing too many breaks or skipping too many breaks, you can limit how often those can be used each day. Time Out suggests two kinds of breaks, an hourly 10-minute break and a 15-second micro break every 15 minutes. But the duration and frequency of breaks are fully customizable. During the break, you can display customizable themes. For example, one available theme suggests exercises. You can also set up workflows to run before, during, or after breaks. You can even do things like pause iTunes as your break begins, and then resume playing when it ends. Time Out can track your breaks and activities over time, too. There's a lot of depth here beyond the simple timer apps you sometimes see for taking breaks, which makes it all the more surprising that Time Out is completely free to use forever. To support its development, it uses an innovative supporter model that unlocks extra features as a reward. This is not a subscription. The rewards remain free permanently when you support the app. Go to djal.com/appstories. That's DEJAL.com/appstories to learn more and download Time Out for free today. Thanks again to Time Out for supporting the show.
So I want to skip ahead a little here, and I want to ask you about how you optimized Apollo for the iPhone 10. And there's this feature that I'm absolutely in love with, and it's the volume indicator in the top left corner of the status bar, basically next to the notch. So how did you think of this? Like, where did the idea come from? Because honestly, I feel like it's going to be one of those details, one of those features that other developers are going to copy. And I think it works really, really well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. That's really nice of you to say. It was one of those things where almost hilariously, the iPhone, when I launched Apollo, it worked pretty well on the iPhone 10, but there were definitely a few small changes I needed to make. And as I was playing with it, in the simulator and everything, I noticed that, the volume, on the older iPhones, the volume indicator just shows through the status bar, but obviously that doesn't work so well
right
on the iPhone 10. And I was like, oh God, I have to completely change that. So I basically just sat down for a while, and thankfully it came to me pretty quickly. I had some eccentric ideas where it wrapped around the notch or something, but obviously that didn't really work very well for telling, where you were in the volume levels. And eventually it just became obvious that the top left was probably the place to go because it's right by the volume buttons themselves. And having just a small bar there, I don't know, I went through enough iterations that it definitely felt the best. And it was kind of cool to see Instagram this week added it to their app too. And it's just cool to see that,
right,
obviously I did something right if they came to the same design themselves. So it's because I originally looked at them, I was like, I wonder if they did something really smart, but they hadn't at the time. So yeah, it was kind of free flying there.
Christian, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the jump bar too, because that's another feature of Apollo, which I think is a little unique. And to me, it's an interesting way to skip around within Reddit without getting, because I guess when I think about Reddit, I think about how easy it is to get a bunch of layers deep in the service, and then navigating your way back and forth could become a chore. And it feels like the jump bar kind of solves that problem. Is that what you were trying to do with that?
Yeah. Basically, it was. I assume you guys are the same way in that I've come to value keyboard shortcuts a lot. Like I use Alfred on my Mac, and Spotlight's great and everything. And I like to I find it's just really nice to be able to type and go to places quickly because it's fast. And I found back when I used Alien Blue, going to different subreddits, I just found navigating around was just a little too arduous. And I just figured most of the time, like I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I just wished I could type it. So having something like that where you can just quickly type where you want to go and hit enter and it'll bring you there was definitely one of the first design considerations I really wanted to nail down. So yeah, like exactly, it was from the get-go. The jump bar was meant to do exactly that, just help you navigate around a little better and not get lost.
Yeah, I could see that working in a lot of different kinds of apps. I mean, I hope somebody copies that one too.
Yeah, no, that would be phenomenal. Yeah, I certainly would as well, because I noticed iBooks has something similar, but it's not as
Right.
you can't type. It's just more of a drop down. But yeah, there's definitely potential there.
Yeah. What do you think of the official Reddit client? Because, I guess I'm trying to remember when it was, maybe a year ago or so, that they actually incorporated some of the ideas and concepts that were in Alien Blue, but it hasn't seen all that many updates since then. I mean, where do you see that app going?
That's a good question too. It's tough for me because I realize that obviously there's a lot of like hard work put into that every day by a lot of different people. So even though it's not personally my cup of tea, I obviously I don't want to say anything too bad about it out of politeness, but they're obviously, from what I can understand, they're clearly prioritizing having a similar experience across iOS and Android, which is something that I obviously don't value as much. I think it should be more have a distinct experience on Android that follows their design guidelines, and the same for iOS. But
Right.
they're Reddit, the website, from what I understand, they're adding a lot more features now than I think they ever have in the past. They're adding like new stuff like chat, which is this new like more almost like iMessage thing rather than the private messages they had before, and they're adding new mod mail and new filtering features. And I think the iOS app is almost just the secondary thing to it that they're working on. Once they add a new feature on the website, let's add it to the iOS app, and then just kind of repeating that. I honestly don't think that the Reddit app is this holistic thing that they're necessarily valuing to the extent it could be. Like, I want my app to be the best experience, not only on iOS, but on any platform. Like when you want to browse Reddit, I want you to reach for your iPhone rather than your MacBook potentially. And I'm not sure they value that the same way. So I think that they're more focused on getting feature parity between the website and the Reddit app rather than really taking the Reddit experience on iOS to where it could be.
Yeah, that's an issue that we see in, I guess, a lot of things where, by trying to be cross-platform, you sort of end up at the lowest common denominator on all fronts.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's and it's funny, like the team I was on at Apple that's kind of what they evangelized a little bit, is they went from company to company kind of like talking about the advantages of being primarily invested in like the one platform, and then when you move to the next, you invest in that one as well, rather than because it's super tempting to write it once and design it once and kind of just spread that out everywhere. But it's one of those things that benefits the company more than the user.
So I assume you're working on this all by yourself. You do the coding, you do the programming, you do the design, you do the marketing. Did you ever find yourself in the situation where you really wanted to build the feature because you wanted it, but it didn't really make much commercial sense maybe to invest the time in a tiny detail or in a feature that it's like, I really want this for me, but I'm not sure if it makes sense to put my time and effort into this?
That's a good question too. I will give a small shout out. My girlfriend designed the website, so that's the one thing I didn't do.
All right.
But in terms of features like that, I thankfully haven't. Like when I released the 1.0 like alpha beta 2 years ago now, it had pretty much reached what I wanted for 1.0. So in terms of features now, I've mostly just been listening to what users have in mind and kind of taking that, chewing on it for a few days, and then designing around it and trying to figure out how I'd want to solve that issue. So in all honesty, I've mostly been lucky that a lot of the ideas haven't been original ones for the last like at least year or so, and that they've been just things the community has really been vocal about wanting. And like I said, with Reddit, when you have thousands of people asking for that specific feature, there's some commercial viability to it.
Right. That's a great way to approach the problem, because it's not like you're talking to some anonymous group of beta testers.
Right.
You're engaging with the very people on the Reddit community that are gonna use your app and are gonna hopefully evangelize the app to other users on Reddit. So that's a great way to actually test a beta. To imagine if somebody ever wants to work on a new Twitter client, maybe talking to people on Twitter would be...
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything you wish you had done differently before launching the app or for the app's launch, the launch strategy? Anything you today, when you're thinking about it, you go like, maybe should have done that in a different way?
Not that juicy an answer, but I honestly can't think of anything. It went so much better than I could have ever asked for or hoped for in like my wildest dreams. So I think the bases were covered pretty well. I reached out to some websites like you amazing folks that covered it and it meant the world, and a few other sites picked it up as well, and thankfully it did really well on Reddit too. And I think with a community-based app like a Reddit app or even a Twitter app, spreading by word of mouth is basically the best thing you could ask for in terms of marketing and growing the app. And I think it's doing a good job there. So I'm pretty happy with how things are going.
So what can you tell us about, if you can, what are you working on next? What should we expect from Apollo?
That's a good question to be asked. It's funny in real life, you talk to a lot of non-technical people and they're always like, "Oh, you finished Apollo. What's next? Like, are you gonna?" But it's funny the answer is almost always like, "No, I put out the 1.0, but there's obviously still lots of work to do, and I'll be on this for a long time coming." So for Apollo, short term, one of the big goals I have is to really lock notifications down because it's something that's notably missing from the app and far and away the most requested feature now. But it's one of those things that, well, it's such a simple feature and it's in so many apps that I don't think a lot of people understand the complexity that goes on behind the scenes, because you can obviously do it all on the device which kind of affects the user's battery. It only does it so often as the iOS system lets it, or you can do it on the server, which is what virtually everybody does, and it provides a much better experience. But then you've got a separate server to maintain. Anyway, long story short, it's a lot of work, but that's something I really want to nail down in the next little bit. And past that, most of my effort will be sunk into the iPad version. Right now, it obviously works well on the iPad, but it's to tell you the truth, it was funny. When I rebuilt the scrolling engine on Apollo at one point, and just more or less started the Xcode project over from scratch, and accidentally left the iPad version enabled, so it would automatically grow up to that. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's great, it's for iPad now." And I was like, "Oh crap, I forgot to disable that." So, and I was going to disable it again, but a lot of people said, no, it's good enough now that we'd rather have this than, the blown up 2x version for a little bit. So, work on the better one, but leave this for now. And so that's kind of my plan. Like, I think the iPad obviously has a ton, even more than the iPhone, of capability in terms of like the power it can have with the more screen real estate you're given. And I'm really excited to see where I can take the iPad experience. I've got some fun designs that I'm really looking forward to put pen to paper with. So yeah, that's probably going to be my long-term goal.
Yeah, I think seeing drag and drop would be really nice.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. That's something I've been missing myself. So that'll probably be one of the first features.
Oh, that'd be really great. I mean, I can just from the standpoint of doing research and gathering links and all that kind of thing that we do all the time on Mac Stories, that's always a nice feature to have.
Oh yeah, no, and it's been wanted for so long that I the least I can do is add it in.
Well, thanks for joining us, Christian. It's been really great to talk to you and learn more about the backstory from Apollo. Good to see that it's doing so well. We're big fans at Mac Stories, and we wish you the best, and really look forward to seeing where you go with the app.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's honestly, I was just so flattered to be covered by the website in the first place. It blows my mind that I got to come on here at all. So thank you guys.
Well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to Christian Selig, the maker of Apollo, for joining us today. And thanks also to our sponsors, Jamf and Timeout. We'll be back next week with another episode. You can find the show notes in your podcast player of choice or on appstories.net. And as always, you can find me and Federico on Mac Stories and on Club Mac Stories. And of course, always on Twitter, where Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you later, Federico.
Ciao, John.